Good evening. Hello, everybody. Yes. And welcome to the University of Houston School of Art, those live here on campus in Dudley Recital Hall, and to those watching us on Instagram Live. Thanks so much for tuning in, coming by to hear Ramon Tejada talk about his work tonight. I am Beckham Dossett, the director of the School of Art, and this is our spring speaker series. Ramon is our second guest this spring, and we have one more coming up. Ruben Ortiz-Torres, April 7th, Thursday, same place, same time. We hope to see you all there. This is a fantastic series. We had 3 speakers in fall, and we'll have 3 this spring. We do this every year. Let's see, what's coming up in the School of Art other than our next speaker on April 7th? Well, we have recurring graduate openings for exhibitions in ESS. Look for those in your email inbox. We do that every other Thursday night. We had our first one last Thursday, and it was fantastic. I think we're going to have one then next Thursday. And then in March, the MFA Master of Fine Arts thesis exhibition will be in the Blaffer Art Museum. The opening will be Friday, March 25th at 6 o'clock. Be there. There's going to be a surprise for you. We'll talk about, you'll get an email message about that later. It's going to be a great event. So let's get back to tonight and Ramon. So I am now going to introduce Professor of Graphic Design, Sibylle Hogman. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much for coming tonight. We are very excited and happy to have Ramon here at UH, and I hope you passed a really lovely day today, and we were very, very excited for you to be here. And it is my great pleasure to introduce you a little bit more in detail. Ramon Tejada is a New Yorkino, Afro-Caribbean American designer as Estudio Ramon and educator based in Providence, Rhode Island and Los Angeles. He works in a hybrid design teaching practice focusing on collaboration, inclusion, unearthing and the responsible expansion of design, a practice he has named puncturing. Ramon is an assistant professor in the graphic design department at WISTI, Rhode Island School of Design. He has taught in the graduate MFA Communication Design program at Pratt Institute and at the undergraduate level at Parsons, New York, or New School, CUNY Queens College, and in the MA program at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, MCAD. He has been a guest artist in the MFA in Graphic Design at Otis College of Art and Design. He received an MFA in Performance Arts from Bennington College and an MFA in Graphic Design from Otis College of Art and Design in Los Angeles. He has spoken and or led workshops at the Design Campus, Kunstgewerbemuseum in Dresden, Germany, the Pratt Institute, the New School Parsons, Mass Art, RCA, CCA, CalArts, Cranbrook, Otis, Emily Carr University, OCAD University, SF Design Week, among others. He has been collaborating with Silas Monroe on a series of workshops titled Throwing the Bauhaus Under the Bus, and with Polymode as curator and lead on a BIPOC design history, Incomplete Latinx Stories of Diseño Gráfico. He's also part of US with Nick Sanchez and Tom On. Estudio Ramon works in collaboration on print, digital, and curatorial design projects. Selected clients include the New School Parsons, NYIT, SVA, the Shakespeare Society, NJPAC, the Brooklyn Philharmonic, and the U.S. Dan Gallery, Bennington College. Please help me to give a very warm welcome to Ramon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Hi. Thank you, Sibyl. That I've never had my bio read like that. Sounds amazing. I'm like, did I do that? I don't remember that. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Hello, everybody on the social media world watching us on Instagram Live. I also just want to give a quick thanks to the faculty and the students today. I had a great time hanging around. The juniors in particular and the grads who hung out with me this afternoon, sharing work, and I share some stuff with them. They shared with me. So I'm going to show you a little bit about, and talk a little bit about this idea of puncturing and some other ideas that I've been sort of developing. So, but before I start, I wanted to take a moment to make an acknowledgement of the indigenous peoples of this American continent, and I think about the whole continent, not just North America and the US. Thinking about whose unceded lands we inhabit, it is important that we reflect on all the peoples and generations who have made it possible for us to be here collectively. Think intentionally and honestly how we honor and acknowledge all of these ancestors in the work we make as designers, and more importantly, as people in our communities. And I think that that's really important for us as designers to do, to really think about our ancestors, the many ancestors and the many people that make it possible for us to be making work. So I'm going to talk about puncturing or making spaces. By the way, you're going to see a lot of GIFs. Thank you, Jiffy.com, okay? Because there's a lot of amazing, talented people out there that make these things and share them with us, and I love it. So puncturing, or also known as maybe ripping, inserting, intentionally, unconsciously, doing these very active things. So I'm a graphic designer, okay? Or I'm a designer, and I love graphic design and or design. But there's a slight little wrinkle here. As a designer, this is a quote I wrote for a piece for the Walker Art Center. As a designer, I have come to terms with the fact that what and who design history has been interested in canonizing up to this point does not reflect me, my cultures, my values, and many of the tenets that make me a citizen, a designer, and a teacher. I don't see myself reflected in much of the narrative of design, not in the history, the theory, the practitioners, or the outcomes. And I wrote that in 2018. It was really tricky because I love design and graphic design, and I've studied it, and I love a lot of that work. So a lot of people think that I don't like it. I actually love it. But I have a lot of questions that I need to figure out in order for me to start making design the way that I'm interested in making design, and not the way that design thinks I should be making design work, because perhaps it doesn't work. And I'm using a slide here. This is an Instagram post from my friend Brandon Waybright when we went to school together at Otis, where Sibyl came and spent a chunk of time one summer and did a workshop with us, and that's where we met years ago, which is amazing. And Brendan went through Megs. We were talking about Megs earlier. Joshua, we were talking about Megs. And Brendan was interested in digging through, pulling apart who is mentioned in Megs. And there are 244 designers mentioned. 19 of them are women, and 2 of them are people of color. And that's kind of a terrifying thing to realize that. One of the main textbooks that is used to teach the design history pretty much skips over a lot of us. And like our cultures and all of that comes with it. So one thing to think about, a caveat, is context and privilege. Okay, so I get to teach, I get to make work, and at this point, this is something that I've been able to do and I'm super privileged to do it. So some of the things that I'm saying to you, I want you to listen to them, but it's coming out of trying things, okay? As I said to I think it was the juniors this morning, I worked at Starbucks for 5 years, okay? And I've done all kinds of things. And all of that ultimately turns into you developing the career that you want to make. So we're not all I didn't jump out of school and I was I'll have this practice. This is a lot of work and a lot of ideating and thinking of oh, what if? It wasn't about like, oh, I did it right away, right? And I'm super privileged to do what I do now and to sort of say this, but I know that a lot of you have a lot of, there's a lot of weight because you're spending a lot of money, school is expensive, and there's a lot of things that weigh in on you in terms of how you decide to make a practice. But I think what's important to realize is that you can actually build a practice step by step, and maybe it doesn't happen in next year, but it happens 5 or 10 years later that you actually develop that thing the way you want it, and you make the work you want to make. Okay, so some context. Oh, let me play. Oh, well, there is a video in here, but let's see. It's muted so you can see the images. So I was born in Dominican Republic, which is this little island in the Caribbean that's pointed there for you, and there's some video of what it looks like. I didn't make this video. I found this on YouTube. It's really glossy. It's like, wow, somebody had a really good drone. And then there's this piece, this is a Taino semi-caoba stand that's at the Met Museum. It's one of the oldest pieces in the Met Museum collection. It's also one of the oldest pieces of artistic artifacts that are found in the American continent. So I was born there. I grew up in New York City. And this is, you know, I've had to spend some time thinking through what this means. I came to the US when I was really young. So what does that place and its history, it's very complicated history, what does that have to do with me now, and how do I reconcile that in the work that I make? So one thing, oops, let me just, it's gonna be like the video's taking over. So yeah, I'm New Yorkino, Afro-Caribbean American. That's all the slashes that I've decided to give. So Dominican Republic, Nueva York, or as Dominicans tend to say, it's a sort of a Spanglish. Does my history, experiences, stories, ways of seeing matter to art and design? Yeah, they do. Okay, so that's my answer to it. But I have to reconcile with the fact that I grew up in New York City. I was born in this country. That photo in the back, that is the landing site of where a famous guy called Christopher Columbus landed and began this whole process of colonization. That's in the Dominican Republic. That is actually the foundation of his house, his first house in the New World. I asked my parents, we need to go there. This was like 6 years ago. And I walked in and the gatekeeper was like, hello. And I'm like, this is where he landed? It's a beautiful beach, by the way, right underneath there. It's like an incredibly beautiful beach. But this was the first settlement in the New World where Columbus settled, and everything is just the foundation. So there's this idea of colonization, questions of race, all sorts of questions that get, that I have of this place and of this history, right? That I think as a designer, I need to pay attention to, that I just can't ignore. So I'm interested in thinking about that. So a lot of this falls on this idea of decolonizing, or this big umbrella. I think about it as an umbrella, right? And I want you to think about, I'm gonna share with you my definition of it, but it's a term that can mean many things to many people. For example, the designer and writer and critic Dana Abdullah says decoloniality is about shattering the familiar, which I think is a really visceral, beautiful like condensation. I can't condense it that tightly, okay? So here it is, ready? I'm gonna read it all. So for me, decolonizing is about physical visibility, structural change, representation, not tokenism, acknowledgement of ideas, land, values that were stolen, repressed, taken, add a whole slew of adjectives there. Giving up, sometimes taking space. Quote, responsible expansion, recognizing what design has ignored and not valued, of narratives, points of views, perspectives, stories, theories, ideas, geographical references, not just of Northern European American lineages, which erases everybody else's identity, aka colonialism. A diversity of lineages, not just the Bauhaus and all its grandchildren, because the Bauhaus does have a lot of grandchildren. That always goes back to the Bauhaus. Okay, I was at the Bauhaus this summer, really love the buildings. Oh my God. But the ideas we have to have questions about, and that's what I'm interested in, right? It is about unearthing, shifting the glance, and decentering, giving agency, being vulnerable, making mistakes. Thinking about our communities, not the design community. Designers don't need to be making work for designers. That is the most boring thing on the planet, I think. We all do it, we love it, and you can we can all send each other an email and say, I would love a copy of that poster, and you'll get it, right? Like, but making things for designers, Think about your communities, thinking about mom, thinking about dad, thinking about your grandparents, your neighbor, our chosen families, right? Acknowledging not knowing and making the periphery the center, right? The periphery, the center comes from Toni Morrison, talking about her work was like making the periphery where she was pushed into the center of her world and the center of her narratives, which I think is incredibly beautiful, right? I would also say starting to look at different works. I've been telling the juniors and the grads today, it's like start looking at not just design. You should be looking at a bunch of other things that are not design at all. Okay, it just gives you a really amazing perspective. All of this takes time. There's a little turtle hanging out. This is slow, okay? This is messy, this is slow. This is not gonna happen overnight, okay? I have no idea what decolonized work looks like. People have asked me, I'm like, I don't know. I'm just trying to do some stuff, right? So it's about ideating, thinking through, and being intentional with the fact that you are actually asking certain questions and you're trying to make work that attempts for you and your community, how you define the community, work that impacts that, right? So puncturing create gaps, spaces, and holes for the local, the ethnic, the non-Anglo or /European to take space. Okay, puncturing asks us to define or redefine our accepted, quote, standards and quote, foundation. Okay, the idea of defining or redefining, I think is incredibly important. We all don't understand these terms. A lot of the times we think we know. I think about it when you're told, when you're asked, do you read that? And you're like, oh, I did, I read it. Half the time, most of us haven't, right? Like we were busy looking at something else, right? Puncturing is about inserting multiple pluralistic perspectives or pluralistic ways of seeing and being. Okay, what is referred to in the colonial circles as the global South. Okay, the global South all over the world are very pluralistic societies. They're not about one thing. They're about multiple things that come together and create this beautiful universe, right? And they use a lot of that language that's incredible of universe and cosmology and multiple cosmologies living together. And you're like, wow, incredible. I can make 30 things instead of one, or I can make 30 ideations of something and they all have space to live and communicate and talk. And I think that's really beautiful. Puncturing is messy and beautiful in its own terms, right? So that's also thinking that messy can be beautiful and also redefining what beauty is and thinking about the specific context that you're making work for, right? It is non-linear. It's a mess. It's beautiful. Okay, if you've ever used Miro boards, I'll show you a few later. I love Miro boards. One of the things I love about it, it's a mess. I love it. And people can go through and you trust them that they'll understand how to navigate through something, right? And it's about resisting the temptation to clean it up and making quote unquote universal and being reductive, which is really challenging for us as designers, graphic designers, because a lot of graphic design has been about reducing things and getting to the essence. But you gotta really think about the essence for whose essence are you thinking about, right? It's not just like generic essence. So it's really being specific and thinking more intentional through things. So think about who am I or are you making for? Actually, who are you making or making with? I always start to ask students that question. Who are you making with, right? Who are you, why am I making for somebody? I want to make with somebody. How do I make things with other people, right? Think of dinner tables, how amazing it is to sit at a dinner table and have an amazing conversation that grows and grows and grows and keeps going. And you're like, oh my God, that conversation is gonna last for years in my brain, right? Why can't we just sit around the table and make stuff together, right? So you start to explore and activate what I consider lowercase design and lowercase art to build value and center communities, your communities. And again, you have to define what that means. And when I say the word community, I don't mean like some ginormous like swath of the city. A community can be you and your best friends. A community can be you and your teachers, you and your parents, you and your grandmother. I use a lot of grandmas, I don't know why, but I love grandmothers and moms too, like they're the best. So you could be making something and start to think about what happens when you're thinking through that lens, rather than thinking about some amorphous community that you don't know who it is, right? So really start to think about who am I making with? Who do I want to make with, right? And how does that change? So what I really love to do personally with all this is I just love to have conversations and collaborations and being critical or literally asking questions, right? Like being critical is just literally you're asking some questions. right? Like, I have some questions. Let's talk about that, right? So dinner tables are really amazing. I love food. Several of you have heard me say, like, I find a lot of inspiration in food, cooking, thinking through food culturally, and what the stories that food has that we need to bring out. Somehow, chefs do it all the time, people that cook do it all the time, but designers were like, no, we don't know what we're doing. We're just gonna go somewhere else. It's like, oh my God, what's that story, right? So my work becomes the surfaces and opportunities for these conversations and our collaborations to unfold, to develop, to grow, to ideate. And I think that's really important to start to think about that, right? So it's literally a love of process, a love of slowness, a love of excavating and or digging, and that's a huge homage to the incredible Gloria Anzaldúa. And if you don't know who she is, you Google her and read her book. And there's a link at the end of this presentation, which I'm sharing with all of you, by the way, so you can have the links. So at the end, you'll get this. The faculty, I'm looking at, I'll send it to you all, and you can send it to everybody. You read that book's like totally, just Borderlands, La Frontera, just my mind exploded when I read that. I'm like, why did I not read this in school? What is the problem, right? A love of ideating. Like, I love to tinker. We're designers, like tinker. So what, it doesn't work? Keep going, like make another one, put it on the copier machine, right? A love of not knowing. It's just too much to know it all. Like, I just don't have time for that anymore. Like, it's so easy when you're young and everybody's like, I know it all. It's like, no, you don't. I don't know everything. I know some things. I'm sharing with you some things. Some of you know a lot. Some of you taught me some stuff today. And that exchange is really incredible. And how do we do that as designers? Whether you're making a poster, an app, a typeface, whether you're making a website, whether you're making video, whether you're making a film, how do you do that? Like, the sharing part, right? A love of unlearning and learning and defining and redefining, which is hard, by the way, right? So like, it's really hard to unlearn. And as you get older, it becomes harder because you get settled in your way. So you have to find ways to hack yourself to like forget things you know or you thought you knew, right? And the world changes, people change, and you start to learn and grow, and you're like, oh, that, I thought I knew that, but I don't, and I need to spend some time with it. A love of play and a love of joy. And joy is really important because you really have to enjoy doing stuff, right? There's just so many things happening in the world that you really just have to be like, I need to take joy and pride in the work I'm making, and whether it works or not, okay, whatever. I'm just gonna work through it, right? Like, and maybe that ideation doesn't work, but then this other one will, okay? So, again, so I call my parents, those of you that speak Spanish probably know what that means, but I call my parents tia y pa, and that's, tia means aunt. And that's because when I was a little kid, my cousins lived with my parents, and they all called them uncle, and like aunt and uncle. So I, forever and ever, have called my parents that. And it's this joke of this little like 2-year-old running around the house calling them that, right? So I made this after I graduated from grad school, that poster in the back. And I was working actually with Tom and Nick, us, and we were making a show about, we were asked to do a show in LA about that idea of graduating and feeling so powerful and then getting a bill in the mail. That realized that you owed all this money and then all these things surface. That you're like, I'm so excited, I graduated, right? Like, so I made this poster for my mom, and I was thinking of the mortar boards and the headboards when you graduate and people like decorate them, which I did not do. So I wanted to make something for my mom. And I also, my parents don't speak English. So almost none of the work I ever made, they could actually engage with, aside from looking at the picture and being like, oh, it's pretty, next. That's the extent. So I wanted to make something that they understood. And I made this and I gave it to her, and she was like, oh yeah, thank you. You know, like, so, and actually what you're seeing is I made a black and white version, and then that sort of like arrow, this is actually a series, there's 5 other posters, I actually painted that on top with these wax crayons that I had found at Muji. And they're like these really cool little wax crayons, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm obsessed with stationery, by the way. So if there's a stationery store, you cannot allow me in, because I will buy pens that I don't need, but I will buy pens, right? This also has in it embedded, there's pictures from magazines and there's pictures of them embedded in there. The pattern all the way at the beginning of the presentation that you saw, that wild pattern in the back, those are my parents. So the idea of inserting, what I'm attempting to do is actually put them into this conversation, literally put them. And as they get older, I realize that it's becoming a bit more emotional, because I'm witnessing sort of as they're getting older, and I'm getting to that point where one day I'm gonna get a phone call, because they're in their 80s. But I'm like, I have to put them in there because they've never been put anywhere in design. Like what, the cookie things my mom comes up with, my mom's a massive storyteller. Like if I would just put her here and she started speaking to you and telling you stories, you will all be like, where did she come up with this stuff? I have no idea. So here's some additional work that I think works within this vein of puncturing, right? Or I'm attempting to do things in a different way. And again, I don't know that all of this works. I'm gonna show you some work that's finished. I'm showing you some work that actually is literally at the printers right now. I'm gonna show you some work that's like almost finished, and then I'm gonna show you some work that I finished that I don't know really what I did. Because I look at it and I'm like, okay. So this is for NJPAC, New Jersey Performing Arts Center. And the reason I'm showing you, this is a big old book. They wanted a ginormous like coffee table book for the 20th anniversary, but they didn't have material. So I got like 3 hard drives, 12 boxes of photos from like, I don't even know what generation that I couldn't even scan. And I made this book there in Newark, New Jersey, which is mostly, primarily like BIPOC, Black, African-American city. And they put this spaceship of a performing arts center, which has become like, you know, this like big spaceship and has like gentrified the neighborhood, and there's a Whole Foods across from it now. As soon as a Whole Foods goes in, you know, right? So they have a huge community service, like educational structure. Some of you might have seen in Thai Paula Scher that they're building. So there's like one of the famous Paula Scher projects where she painted the outside of the building. I was really captivated by bringing that community in. I did not want to make a project with a bunch of funders, AKA rich white people in New Jersey, sitting there with kids of color like, hey, we saved you. Because I was that kid and I'm not interested in that. And I think anybody with money should not be interested in that picture. So I dug through and I found all these pictures. And then I found that picture of President Obama, and he was looking out because I'd been there. And I got fascinated. So the whole project is anybody that's on stage is not allowed to be glossy and all fancy. I had a lot of questions about that. People were like, but it's the president, we can't do that. I'm like, we don't know what he looks like. Like, it's okay. And like, it's so beautiful to see like, you know, that Savion Glover who works there a lot with the kids. Just Savion was like, the photographer went into Savion and I was like, this is amazing. It's just Savion teaching the kids how to tap dance. So the whole book is literally, I got a Word doc of quotes. That was it. There was no like narrative holding this whole thing. It was just like 57 pages of people's quotes, usually funders. And then I got a typeface that Paula Scher had designed, that has selected to be the like branding element, and I went to town on it with a lot of fluorescent colors. Because one thing, if I can get it in print, I'm going fluorescent colors. So the whole book is again showing the community, thinking about who are the kids, and a lot of those kids look like me. So I want to make sure that they're in there, like that they're really like, it's not a book that shows other people, but that community that really lives around there. So that's that. The Decolonizing Design Reader, some of you might have looked at this crazy document. I don't know that, I didn't think I was doing this when I did it. It just happened that it showed up that way. So this is the first version of the Decolonizing Design Reader. It was a poster for a lecture that I got asked to give by Professor Janice Robertson at Pratt in the art history department. Janice, we were in a faculty like workshop, and she's like, oh, Ramon, I love how you talk. I would love to. And I'm like, what? I'm not an art historian. I don't know what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? I just have a bunch of questions. She's like, you can do it. You can do it. And then I started having a bunch of conversations with a bunch of people. Because I'm like, what do I do? Where do I go? And then I started gathering resources. And this is the first one. Notice it's just a bunch of web addresses. Good luck typing all those long addresses. This was the material that I had gathered, including conversations that I had with a bunch of friends, friends who also have a really good friend who teaches sociology and is focused on equity and diversity, some friends who are in grad school, some colleagues at Pratt, some people that I've been talking to, Silas, and there's Nicole Killian, Brandon, a bunch of other people that I have been talking, MJ Valvanera in Mexico City. We had just all been talking about a lot of these things. So I decided to design the poster. They asked me to design a poster. I designed this. I wanted to do no hierarchy. I lost the battle, just so you know, because there is some hierarchy. And then I understand that this was very highly criticized in the art history department as being one of the worst things they had ever seen. And they were afraid to tell me, and I was like, whoever said that, I mean, can I hire your child to do it if they think their kid? I mean, I'm all up for little kids doing work, by the way. I'm like, sure, it would be less trouble than the time I spent thinking about this poster, right? But this is kind of what the reader looks like in many ways. It actually looks like that document all the way on the left, except I changed the typeface a few weeks ago. It's just a list, and I wasn't interested in organizing it in a neat way because part of it is you got to dig through it. Those of you that have gone through it, it's not organized. I did a version of it organized, and I will never show it to anybody because I was like, I'm cleaning it up. It needs to be organized. No, you can go through it, find something you find exciting, find something that excites you about it, find something that you like, oh my God, that piece of writing that I've never read, or that video, or that sound, or that music, oh my God, that's what I need. So I was very inspired a lot by John Leguizamo. I've always loved his shows in theater. This is actually Latin History for Morons, which I saw in New York, and I was just like, how do you do that? He posted his syllabus of all the books he read to put the show together, which is amazing. Looking at bell hooks a lot, looking at Toni Morrison and James Baldwin. Designs for the Pluriverse, Arturo Escobar, that book is incredible. I will warn you, that is a grad level textbook, but it's not a book you read overnight, but it's just profoundly incredible, and Escobar is part of the sort of group of decolonial thinkers, and that book is incredible, like what he does. How he talks. There's Borderlands, La Frontera by Gloria Anzaldúa. Incredible book. That's more digestible, I feel, in many ways, because the way she writes it in 7 languages. And when you start reading it, you'll understand why. Because she believes she spoke 7 languages. Looking at teaching transgress, starting to think about how do I teach, how do I make, and how does that conversation go back and forth, right? And it all started with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who's right in the middle, her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. And if you've never seen it, you should watch it. Where she talks about the dangers of having universal stories. What happens when she started writing in Nigeria about winter and apples? She's like, mind you, we don't have any of this, but I was reading all these British novels. And getting to the US and her roommate asking her some really preposterous questions because her roommate had never experienced somebody coming from Africa. And she was like, those narratives that I get ingrained and that we just continue to perpetuate. So this is what I have. And then I have Celia Cruz. Any of you, the Latinx peeps here? There's Celia, who's what is there to say about Celia? It's just azúcar, that's all you gotta say. And if you don't, just go find it, you'll find it. That's her famous iconic line, it's azúcar, right? And just incredibly influential. So there's a lot of things that I was engaged with thinking. And did I skip a page? No, there we go. And then I made a version that is printed. I have a copy that I'm gonna give Seville, so you have it here. I printed this because Callie Nikitas, who's the chair at Otis in LA, where I went to grad school, amazing mentor, teacher, friend, all sorts of things, asked me, I need you to print that. I'm like, what? It's a Google Doc. How am I going to print that? I did this in a weekend. I sent it to Newspaper Club in London. I sent it out, and then it showed up at the book fair in LA. I literally shipped it to LA. I didn't even look at it. I was just like, whatever shows up, shows up. I like. This is also, again, it's just an artifact that is printed because I don't know why my phone is going up. Excuse me. It got printed. I love it, but it's, again, non-functional because you need the Google Docs, for which there's a link here. So you get to the Google Doc, and then it has all these links that you can click, and you can experience the whole thing. But I love the printed piece because I wrecked my brain on the typography all weekend long. It's a massive list. This is kind of what it looks like now, right? Then I get to, from notes on being a Dominican York. So this is the project that I've been sort of working through since 2017, when I started taking notes in the notebook and saying, ooh, I don't know that I want to make design. I think I want to try using gouache. I'm not a painter. I don't trust myself with gouache. I don't trust myself with oil sticks. I'm like, I don't know how to draw. What am I doing? But I wanted to try it. So I started to do things, and this is all process, by the way, right? So that background is a GIF. I love making GIFs just to accumulate all the research and just watch it play like a little movie. And I do this on my phone because GIFs are really good. I text them to myself, and then I'm like, oh, this is fun. Okay, what am I saying here? Right, they're my parents, they're there. And then I started making copies of certain things, like a postcard from the DR, and then started making marks and lines. The idea of a line, the border in the DR is really contentious. It's the border with Haiti, and there's all sorts of complications with that border. Of course, I live in the United States. The question of the border is a huge question. So these borders, political borders, all sorts of borders that we have to deal with, I started making lists of words, and it all ended up being a list of words. So I went back to typography, which is the GIF on the bottom, on the lower right-hand side, you see, those are just words and typography. So I started to explore. When I took my first typography class, I was told that I couldn't do certain things to letter forms, that was absolutely wrong. And I was like, why? And the teacher could never explain to me why. And I just said, okay, and now, guess what? I'm doing them all the way I want, which means I am stretching them, and I outline them, and I will add stroke to death until the letter completely falls apart. And then I'm like, oh, okay, bring it back. It's too much. Now I don't know what I'm doing. Now you can't read anything, right? So here's another iteration of it. You start to see, I went to the Rizzo, and then I said, oh, those pages are actually the work. I don't need to make anything out of that. That is the work. Like all that writing and annotation, I love annotation. So literally writing on things, like the way I used to with books. And here's more iterations of them, right? So here's a version of it from a gallery at Stevens University in Baltimore. I literally just send them the files, and I tell the students, do what you want to do with it. They're like, but Ramon, like we want, I'm like, no, I trust you guys. Put it together the way you want in the gallery. I didn't even get to see it because it was during COVID. So I just had a video tour. They did amazing. They turned into a pattern. There's the pattern in the back, which they blew up really large. And I was so excited and thrilled because I was like, oh, it's wallpaper. And then one of my friends said, you should make pillows out of that. I'm like, that's too much. I really cannot make a pillowcase and like sleep on my pet. No. And then this version with the white walls, that was a RISD last fall in the faculty show where I did vinyl, which I love. Partly because I don't have to install it. So I think I don't have to install it. So they installed it, and again, I just gave them the printed vinyl, and I told the installers, you select how you want to put them. I am not giving you how to do it. He's like, are you sure? I'm like, take it. Surprise me. So there's that collaboration. I'm trying to make space for the people, other people, and see what happens. So I'm actually puncturing design and inserting the language, the words, the idea, a geographical place, these people, my parents, my lineage, into design's narrative. So I'm sort of trying to force it in, push them in there, like somehow, right? At least in my mind, okay? And then there's some projects like Grits or Games, Notes in a Relationship. Some of you have seen this. I understand, Cheryl, we were talking about this earlier. this is for Poster House in New York, where they had a show called the Swiss Grid. And they had a whole show in New York with Swiss Grid, and then they decided that they were gonna ask several people to give counter arguments to that sort of like the prevalence of the Swiss Grid. I said, I just wanna make a GIF that's a presentation. Then it ultimately ended up being a GIF, MP4, and a PDF. If you go to their website, again, you'll get this link, you can see how they put it, because then they had a bunch of teachers asking them, can we have the script? Can we have Ramon's script? And then I was like, sure. And there's the script. This was all about, I love grids, and I had to start to figure out what is it that I like about grids? What are the grids that I see? And why do I only like one type of grid? And then I started to do historical research about grids and how they show up in all sorts of cultures, and then realizing, oh, I can make my own grid. But that takes a bit of time because you think you have to do things in a particular way, and then you realize, I love Joseph Mueller Brockman, but that was his way of doing things, right? Like, it just so happens that there's several books that he put out. Lucky enough, he got to put books out. And then people started running away with it. It's like, this is the way to do it. It's like, that was probably the way he wrecked his brain in his studio, trying to make interesting work. So, you start to think about, oh, I can take agency and do my own version, right? And investigate how to do that, right? Instead of just thinking, oh, I just need to do this thing that has been done over and over and over and over, right? So, and I annotated it, the Codex books from Mexico that you can see if you go to Mexico, you go to the Anthropology Museum, a fractal grid in Africa, really amazing. So it's really trying to have a conversation with myself about this thing that is so prevalent in what I like to do a lot and my relationship to it, right? So here's some stuff in collaboration. Again, I think collaboration is really important to figure out how you collaborate. What does that mean to you? How do you have honest, thoughtful collaborations, not extractive collaborations? Meaning, oh, you know how to do this and I don't, so can you do this for me? And then you turn into an art director and directing people. No, it's the collaboration where it's an equal exchange and you're back and forth in the conversation, right? And that's always tricky, but you can figure out ways of doing that, right? Like, and I think you can. So there's all sorts of stuff. There I am with Silas. There's us, he bought me a Bauhaus t-shirt and we wore it on the first day of the class at Otis. And that is actually Josué, who's one of the students, Josué Molina, one of his projects, where he was obsessed with one thing and the actual project was that video. This was his final piece, was this video of us looking at the thing he had made. And he's like, oh my God, I'm like obsessed with that thing, but the actual project, the actual final outcome is like this really cool thing that people can look and see themselves reflected, how this form changes. Writing, really hard to do. I love the people that can do really amazing writing fast. It's super slow for me, but I've been asked to write, be interviewed, talk to other people. That panel led by Kelly Walters in Chicago 2 years. This was the last thing we did, and then we went into lockdown a month later. And then Kelly took it and made a book out of it that came out. So again, the iteration, sitting around with designers, having a round table, writing a piece like graphic design in conservative times. What does that mean? So all of these are collaborations. There's editors, there's other designers, there's people interested in having a conversation. There's a piece there in Amalgam magazine that Puya Mari asked me to write. And again, it's just collaborating and like putting some of these ideas out. I always thought that I was just gonna make posters and books and things like that. And then I'm writing and then I'm talking. And I'm like, okay, I'm comfortable talking more than I am writing, honestly. So, like when your teachers tell you to write, let's do some writing prompts, like totally do them, love them. Oh my God. It's an incredible skill to have and being comfortable in it. So yeah. Here's BIPOC design history in complete Latinx stories of diseño gráfico. This is a collaboration with Silas and Polymode, right? Silas and Brian, who some of you met last week. So they did Black Design in America, which ran in the winter of 2020, which is amazing. And then Silas said to me, I know you have this doc. We need to talk about it. It was a notes sheet on my phone that I've been keeping of like this idea of trying to do these talks. And then we started talking And then all of a sudden, I'm like curating this talk, which of course, part of this is that one person is not going to do all of this. You need a lot of people involved. Some people like collaborated. Natasha's here. Natasha was jumping in on the talks and like adding all this amazing information that she had in research. Or like, oh my God. So there was a lot of things, but it wasn't just about talking like, oh, here's my research. It was literally about, here's some work that I have in progress, and let's have a conversation. And people started to add things. So the resource files for these are amazing. If any of you want to take the class and you don't, just send an email on the website, BIPOCdesignhistory.com. Just send an email saying, I'm a student at U of H and I would love to do this. You will get to take the class. And they're all stored, so you just literally are watching the classes. There's some incredible research that people have there. I started with Arte y Diseño Latino Comunicación Cotidiana, which was a collaborative talk between my friend Carlos and I. We went to Otis together. Your classmates, your friends in school are the people that years later will continue to sustain you, okay? We started talking about like the everyday beautiful communication that shows up, particularly in Mexico and the DR. And we just went at it with that and how beautiful that is, right? We had Ahmed Ansari, who talked about theoretical considerations in reading Latin American design history. He's incredible. He teaches at NYU. He worked with Escobar, and he just theoretically framed this for us in such a beautiful way, the way he can, that is incredible. And, we had Independence in Incomplete Survey of Cuban Design. Ana Llorente and Elaine Lopez did this incredible, beautiful presentation about like a survey of Cuban design, talking a lot about the politics. On typography and language in Peru, Juan Villanueva, who's amazing, he's also a type designer in New York. Some of you may follow him, he's incredible. Did this mind-blowing presentation about Peruvian design, where he actually invited 3 of the designers, one of them Oscar, who's like in his 80s, and is like the godfather of design in Peru, and he was the most incredible person we could not believe. We're like, where has this guy been all of our lives? And he was in his studio talking to us, and he's like, I'm surprised that a bunch of cool, hip, young kids want to talk to me. I'm some old guy. I don't even design anymore. His lettering is incredible. And there was one moment that it was him talking, and Juan had a slide of him when he was like in his early 20s drawing letters. And we were like, oh my God, like so beautiful. And then another example is Otros Susurros desde los Andes. Vanessa Zúñiga Tinacere, who does this incredible work. Look her up. Look at her work. Incredible. All literally privileging her ancestors. She's of an Andean culture and looking at that visual language and using tools as a designer because she studied design. She uses processing in an incredible way to output endless variations to these beautiful languages that exist in the Andes. So it was really exciting to be part of it and just have all these conversations that were just really incredible. We're starting to talk about making a book. So that's another project. I'm like, a book? I don't do books. But, it's a collaboration. Here's what Carlos and I did a Miro Board. This was our slide. We literally took people through this Miro Board. And by the way, we got 1, 2. 1 was where we started. 2 was the first edit. And then we ended up with this at the bottom. So we gave everybody the Miro Board. Like, go dig through. There were stuff that we couldn't talk about because we would be there for 6 decades, right? And that's Carlos and I talking. Bring It Home, a show I did at Bennington College at the Uzdan Gallery. This is with Ann Thompson, who's the curator there. And this was during lockdown, and we wanted to figure out a show that people could have at home, pretty much. That's the essence of it. How do we make a gallery show? How do you have your own gallery? Why do people need to go to a gallery to look at work? And people got the show in the mail, and they posted it up. That's one of Ann's friends. I'm posting it at Harvard in Cambridge, at Harvard Square. He just literally put it on the gates. I love that. And it was primarily BIPOC designers talking about things that were bubbling up, right? So for example, here's some process shots. There's all the posters, all the prints. I have a set for you as well, Bill, so you can have them. right? We painted the gallery. I did not want a white wall gallery. I wanted a brown. This is Turkish Coffee is the name of the paint, like wall paint. I wanted that dark, beautiful, rich. It came down to, believe it or not, a paint called Swiss chocolate versus Turkish coffee. Turkish coffee was very textured, and that's why it won, right? But you have people here. There's Kelly Walters' work, Superfly, right? There is the work of Helena Metaferias, the collage that you'll see in a little bit. I have one of those words that I was playing with, chancleta. If you know Spanish, that's, you know, chancleta. They're gonna take that flip-flop and throw it at you, usually mom, because you just did something bad, right? There's a piece by Puya at the bottom, and then there is stylist exploration of the black grid, and this is something that he's been working through. So these are all posters that you just get in the mail. And here's the catalog that's coming out. Newspaper Club printed. This is actually a draft of it. This is not the finished version, by the way, because there's one more round of edits on this, right? So the thing keeps ideating into different forms that we share with people, right? And it shows up and engages with you, right? So you can see all the works, and it's really thinking about democratizing that, right? Here's a piece. This is at the Punta Generations, Helena Metaferias. This is the catalog for her show at the MFA in Boston. This is Helena and I working at her studio in New York at the World Trade Center. This is like the most ridiculous studio I've ever been to. It's like on the 30th floor, and they give, the developers made a floor that they give to artists. Ridiculous. I'm like, are you crazy right now? I'm like, this is our view? It was like insane view of New York. And she's there, so I went and I took a version of it, and then we started hacking through the book together. And she was like, oh my God, I've never done this. This is so incredible. But I was really interested in what she had to say and how she saw it and what she was seeing of the design, right? This is sort of what it looks like. I'll show you some spreads. This is the typeface. This is, typeface is by a vocal type foundry, Trey Seals, who's amazing and making a lot of work. If you follow Trey, it's incredible. And then these are some of the spreads. And the typeface there is by Karin Ang, who's one of my former students at RISD, who did this typeface while at school. And if you follow Mitski, the Mitski new album has that's the typeface. And I was like, oh my God, Karin is incredible. So I was also, this is just some spreads. I was also trying to do different things here. I'm obsessed with trying to get my type to be a bit more like fluid. It's the way I'm thinking about it. I'm not thinking about it as like in other ways. I'm just thinking very super fluid. This is very tight. A lot of text. I did not want to cut anything. So I worked with the curator and we were talking. This essay is like, this is an interview, and it goes, and I just felt Helena's process and the way she talks about it and the history is really super important for people to understand. Some of the spreads there. These pieces, I worked with her. She's like, I've never done type. Can you please sit with me and have a crit? I'm like, okay. And then we spent an hour, and then I saw them at the show. I was like, oh my God, Helena. Because, she started thinking about space. And people started, they're really beautiful. There's a website that she has that you can download those and then make your own versions of them. And then some final thoughts I have for you all to think about as we're wrapping this up. So think about art and design needs to be pluralistic, right? Start to think about pluralism, right? Like multiples. Universality, homogeneity, and our penchant for the sameness is dead. Let plurality reign. Okay? Let's shift, rethink, redefine art and design's point of view, point of references with the work we make. Think about how your work is shifting things. Shifting is a beautiful kind of verb to think about. Right? Shift, yes. Right? Take a second and reflect on whom are we inviting to make with, not for. Who are we collaborating with? Who are we making space for when we're making work, right? And how do you do that formally? There's some tactics you can develop and start to play with in one project, and then another, you find another, and you keep playing with it, right? Reflect on whose voice or voices or stories you are elevating with your work. Are you just reflecting and elevating the same three voices that we've all heard before? Or are you like, oh, I'm gonna find some other voices, right? Decenter shift with thoughtfulness and intention, right? Being very thoughtful as to why you're doing it and how you're doing it, right? And you're being in serious intention. Riri's telling you to watch out, okay? She's great. And ideate respectfully in collaboration and with joy. And this is Cespirito, which some of you may know, but this is the super famous Saturday morning show from Mexico that I watched when I was a kid. And thank you whoever put them on YouTube. Because this is one of the most amazing kid shows ever in Spanish. And just the joy in the show, it's a very silly show. It's a kid show. It's very silly, but so beautiful. Right? Make for mom and dad, or make for your community. And again, define what your community, who is your community? Like, who am I interested in making work with or for, right? They're my parents, that's them, this was last year. That's my mom's birthday last year. And that's them being hipsters. That was in Washington, D.C. in the 60s. Yeah, it's really funny, but this is them. I don't know why they had a cake that big. They're not supposed to be eating cake, but I was like, whatever, just eat it. It's fine, it's your birthday. So 2 quotes to finish that I really feel are really beautiful. In the world we want, everybody fits. The world we want is a world in which many worlds fit. That's from the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional. You will find that quote in a lot of decolonial texts. The beginning, usually that's at the beginning. That's like, this is the thought that we have. Everybody fits in this world. So how do we make work like that? And then the artist Camille Billup said to bell hooks, the amazing bell hooks who died last year, put all your friends in your art, everybody you love, so one day they will find you and know that you were all here together, which I was like, what? That is so beautiful to think that you're making work and you're putting the people you love, and that's a record of everybody's like value and existence and place in the world. So, thank you. And here is the list of the resources. So I'm gonna send this to you all, and they're all links. So you can all dig through all of this. So thank you. And thank you all for smiling. I saw a lot of smiles, which makes me feel really good. Because I'm like, yes, everybody's here. Any questions? We have some time for some questions, thoughts, questions, references, things you want to share to like be like, Ramon, have you seen this? And I'll be like, I don't know.
Do you want to expand on your Miro process?
On my Miro process? Oh my God, what is, okay, let me go to one of these slides. How do you, what should I, how? It's a mess. And I just love it, like literally dump everything you think you want to talk about in it, and then go to bed, and then the next day or 2 days later you sit down and you're like with a cup of coffee and you're like, okay, let me try to make an edit of this. It's an edit process, but not deleting it, just putting it to the side. So that if you need to go back to that, you'll be like, oh yeah, I want to include that, so I'll bring it in. That's really what this is, and then we got super creative with the lines, trying to make a path for ourselves and trying to give ourselves notes as to what we were going to say. This was very risky because we were like, we're showing a bunch of designers a Miro board. And we're like, they're going to expect like a PowerPoint or some, I don't do PowerPoints anymore. This is on Glitch, which is an awesome app, by the way, that my friend Carlos showed me. If anybody's interested, this is glitch.com. Glitch. It's an app, but you can do it online, and it's amazing to do presentations. I was like, Carlos, wow, oh my God. And you could use different typefaces too, which is great. So that's really a process. What you're seeing, there's a conversation between, actually 4 conversations between Carlos and I, and a bunch of emails and text messages. Don't delete that. What are you doing? Don't, put it back. Or do we need to talk about, we spent an hour talking about Coca-Cola signage in Mexico, because I'm like, we're not having that conversation. Like, we need to just talk about the fact that Coca-Cola in Mexico hires more sign painters than anybody else. because Coca-Cola in Mexico, and they do this in other parts of the world as well, not just Mexico, I found this out. They're like, oh, you have a store, but you don't have budget to put a sign. So we will paint it for you if you let us put Coca-Cola on it. And we're like, think about that. You have no budget to have a sign, but Coca-Cola just branded your store, so you become Coca-Cola. And because Coca-Cola is the drink, everybody shows up at your place. And we spent a whole time thinking about the intricacies of like that capitalist structure of Coca-Cola coming in. So, but I was like, Carlos, we can't have, because we're gonna, that will derail our conversation and we'll center it into Coca-Cola rather than talking about sort of this tradition of sign painting in Mexico and the Dominican Republic and a multitude of countries in the global south. Is that helpful for the Miro? Yeah, just use it as a sketchboard. Yeah. Other questions, thoughts, ideas? Yeah. If I understand correctly, so looking at that class, are there ways that we're using the resources to envision sort of developing classes, or?
I think a lot of the resources shared on that project aren't really available anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so I don't think there's a particular mode of integration of that curriculum.
We just sort of bring all that stuff, at least for me, bring it in, and Salas is using it in the class he's teaching. So he's literally using those classes and just sharing that stuff with the students.
Just
Straight up sharing it. I mean, we're straight up love the idea of sharing, open source. If it's on the internet, somebody put it up there. And I'm just gonna give you the link. Like, it's open source and you need to read this. Sometimes it's video, it's not always reading, by the way, just so you know. There's a lot of really amazing video. There's a lot of audio that a lot of people have done reading their own work. So you could literally just take your walk and just listen to this amazing talk that somebody's giving, and you don't need the text. You're like, oh my God, they're making the whole, like remaking the world for you as they're talking about these beautiful ideas or research they've done, right? If you go to like Ahmed's website, and he did a decoloniality class 2 summers ago, that was amazing, on Saturday. Who knew 70 people were interested in talking about decoloniality for 7 weeks in the summer? We did, and they're all on his website. You literally can listen to the whole other clip, and it's actually the best theory class I've never taken. Because he's so incredible at like talking about that and like letting you sort of think through it. But again, it was just he presented and then we went for the conversation, and that conversation got really juicy. The BIPOC class conversations got, so juicy. There were moments where the presentation was like, yeah, we did a presentation. The conversation. And the stuff people shared that we didn't know about was incredible. And that's where the resources are really good, because they're actually expanding that initial presentation, if you will. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Other thoughts, questions? Yeah.
Who are your influences and your
I heard that one. It's everything. Like, I love all kinds of stuff. I listen to, read, look at, and try to engage all kinds of things. I love cooking and food. So I gravitate towards looking at food and cooking as design. And particularly the stories that a lot of chefs are telling through that food. You can even think this closely. What story is this particular food that your grandmother made, and you constantly think of that recipe? What is the story that that's telling when you cook it? And then, okay, take that and start to play as a designer. And being like, wait, how do we do that as a designer, right? Food. My favorite latest show was La Divina Gula on Netflix. The awesome street food in Mexico. Just Google it, look at it, and get ready to die, because it's the best piece of design I've seen recently. I literally was watching the show like, I want to be the graphic designer working on that show. It was so bad. It was so beautiful and so funny. And they talk about a bunch of things that as a designer you hear and you're like, yes, experimentation. If you're not experimenting, what are you doing? You're doing nothing. I was like, oh my God, It's like, it's all about experimenting and trying things. Yes, it looks ridiculous. Yes, the 13-pound baby burrito looks ridiculous. But people line up in Mexico City to buy the freaking thing, and it's 13 pounds. You see it, they show it to you, it's like, you can carry, they wanted a baby. It's ridiculous, but it's so incredible. And then the stories are a lot about, mom made this way. Mom did this. Somebody's mom is like, I don't know what he was doing. I called him up and say, stop doing that stupid stuff. You're really just wasting time. Guess what? That's the thing that the family now, literally that is their livelihood. This thing that their son experimented. I think it was a roll that he made. And his mom is like, that's not how you do it. That's just wasting time. Who knew? Like, they put it on Instagram, and a week later, instead of making 20, they were making 200, 500. Now they have like 5 shops because they can't keep, like, it's insane. So food, I mean, I studied performance art and theater and dance. I love a lot of some of the old performance, like especially sort of the postmodern, which in dance happened in the 60s, not in the 90s. So there's some of the thinking, and again, it's thinking about ideas, and then how do you like reflect and process those ideas and start to make processes for yourself. Right, so some of them you can't just be literal about it because it does. You're like, But one of the things that I was thinking about a lot of dance and performance is, in dance and performance theater, your body is it, yo. Like you have that body. And then one day I was like, wait, as a designer, we're always like, where's our body in here? Because we're making things for people, and those are bodies. So are we considering that people are moving around, they're doing things, they're physical? We're physical beings, so how does that play into what we make, right? And how we react. So I told the grads, some of you, Maris Cunningham, John Cage, Solo Wit. Some of these people you can probably see at the Menil every once in a while. There's probably a slew of Solo Wit at the Menil when they put it up. Amazing. I love Bill T. Jones in New York. Bill T. is, you go for the guttural, because Bill T has been having the race conversation since the 80s in New York dance. And it's seriously incredible. Like the narrative structures, Pina Bausch, who's a German choreographer, I saw her and I was like, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. Performance collage. Essentially, that's what she was attempting to do. Can you have a collage that moves on stage? And it may not be linear at all. It doesn't have to be. You're smart enough to go home and figure it out. I don't need to tell you like everything like that. So those were some of my influences. A lot of music. I've been listening to like Latin music recently again. Some of it I'm like, what is this? I've never heard this. Lots of really amazing younger musicians who are doing some really cool things. Like El Keamo, Elkeamo. It's my friend's my friend Carlos's friend who does music on the side. He's also a programmer, by the way. But the music is amazing, and it's just like picking up, and it's just all these influences of like listening to all this music that he used to listen when he was a kid and remixing it for now. And it's just really fantastic. And I listen to classical music too, because I like some stuff. So just being open to a lot of things. Not so much design per se. There's some designers that I follow and I love, and I'm like, oh, I love their work. And then there's some designers that I'm like, yeah, okay, next. And then there's some graphic designers that I'm like, oh, look, they're doing that again. Okay. Like, okay, you doing it again. Great, awesome. I love it, I respect it, but it's like, let me find somewhere else to look at. Because it just asks you a bunch of different questions. So, yeah. Other thoughts? Questions? Yes?
Thank you for your presentation. You're mentioning the dance right now made me think of your remark about typeface, and that you were interested in finding a flow. Does that have something to do with the way the typeface looks different in different languages? I think the way that type flows in Spanish, the way type flows in English.
Honestly, I've not thought about it, so now I have a note. Thank you for, I didn't even make that link. You just made that link for me, which is amazing. I'm like, oh, I have a note.
You see it happening in spreads with Helena?
Yeah.
In spreads, there was something about the way that the block was very different. It seemed to be shimmering.
Oh, okay, you picked that up, yes. I was attempting to do certain different things with that piece of work. And a lot of it was just a conversation Helena and I were having. So she was it was very important for me that her voice came forward and not my voice as a designer, but we were interested in collaborating. She's like, there's something that you're doing that's making me rethink some of this, and there was something that she was doing and saying that made me react. And to me, that's a really successful collaboration. And that's what I'm looking for. Like, I'm interested in that kind of engagement, and that are two people talking, and it's a conversation that goes back and forth. It's not one person telling the other what to do. And I think a lot of the times in design, we're so used to the relationship being client, designer, you do what they tell you to do. And I've always been like, well, some of the people that are supposed to tell you what to do don't really know what they want or what is it that they're looking for. And then sometimes they put themselves in a position of being vulnerable and say, can you help us put this together? Which is, I think it's amazing. And then other times they're just like, I just want this. And I'm like, yeah. I've also said no to projects where people say, I just want to make this. I'm like, you do know that I'm just asking me to make somebody else's work and copy it. I don't do that. So I think there's moments when you have, but the flow, I love that note, thank you. Now I'm gonna have a note to take. Yeah.
So on that note, in terms of language, right? So given the Miro Board, you were using lots of slides and different things. So you said that you went to New York as a very young kid.
Yeah.
But your parents don't speak English. So I assume that you communicate with them in a mix of English, Spanish, Spanish.
Espanol fully.
Fully
Fully
Spanish. Okay.
Espanol, yeah, no Spanglish there.
So is that why all these work that you show, the ones that were printed that says "morir soñando"?
Yeah.
All that. Like I love that phrase. You have "morir soñando", you have "Mario pendejo". So love it, totally right. So how do you see the language evolving since you live in New York City, right? It's like you used to
Yeah,
live in
right.
You grew up with that confluence of languages, where I think of the Dominican Republic that they speak Spanish, but all these confluence of
Right.
languages that came
Mm-hmm.
from the slave trade. How do you relate that into your work?
Natasha, I don't think I have an answer to that, because I think that's sort of what I'm sort of struggling through. Making this was difficult, because I'm like, oh, it's language. I thought I was going to make visuals, right? But I'm making typographic form. I didn't realize that. So when I was scratching through all of these notes, you see the list starting to emerge, and then I realized it's just a bunch of words, and I have to go back to dealing with that. So I'm still sort of processing, thinking about what do I want to say through this. That's why I keep saying this project is an ongoing project. I will never finish this project, by the way. I've given myself that space. I'm just going to keep playing around. Vinyl is the thing right now. So anybody that asks me to make one of these, I'm like, I'm sending you vinyl. Because I actually love the fact that it can just change and shift and move around. And also the change and shift is really awesome, I think. Because I originally thought, oh, these are going to be all big posters that I'm going to wallpaper in this space and just put them all over the place. Then I was going to do bumper stickers, which I was actually going to do and bring with me here to give you all bumper stickers. And then I chickened out on the bumper stickers. Because I was like, oh, I know. See, I should have done, I knew I should have done. I'm going to make, now that you're all I'm going to make them. And I'm like, how do I get this out there? And of course, these words have particular meaning to people. They also have meaning that morphs depending on what Latin American country your typical language, it has its own local meaning. So I'm like, it doesn't mean the same thing for all of us. So I'm like, this is so unstable, but I love it, right? I think that one that people really get, the chancleta is I think has become a Latin thing that everybody in Latin America just chancleta, and you just have that image of Like, my friend Anna, she was like, I need a copy of that. I mean, my mom used to scream that she used to throw the chancleta that all the time. Me, my dad, everybody. So I think, yeah, it's just something that I'm sort of playing with. And again, I say play. Sometimes it's just like I'm fighting with, trying to figure that out. But mom and dad are in complete Spanish. They'll say thank you, but that's about it. They understand some words. Like, you can't say certain words around my parents because they know. Usually they're curse words, but they're like, I'm like, so yeah. And just playing with it and realizing that it's really more fluid and more playful than maybe I was thinking about it originally, or the way that I've been taught. That certain words are like just very solid. And, yeah. So I hope that answers. Yes.
So I'm not Providence myself, and I see myself making a lot of good work. And so I guess my question is, how do you define your Afro-Latin self, like Afro, like being Afro, or being like Latin, and then being like, from New York, being raised, like kind of like, define all of that and kind of like define yourself, I guess?
Oh. They're just all part of, I mean, there's no way that, it's also being very specific that I'm making a decision, because in many ways in Dominican culture, the Afro part, it's not very comfortable. Because they sometimes, the conversation of race and cult and that in the Dominican Republic is really tricky. Like when I go visit my parents, I really fight with that. Because it's so like in your face that they don't think that they're, and I'm like, sorry, you are. And I think it's just part of this mix that happened, and I love it all. For me, it's just amazing. It's just incredible to be able to have that much history and that much like incredible lineage to myself. And some of it I just never really gave a thought about, and now I am actually. So that, I just love it.
I guess like a follow-up question is like, how do you like feel with like being like a minority and like being a minority and like being, feel like graphic design or like, it's mostly like westernized and stuff like that. And I mean like, there's not a lot of Spanish and a lot, and it's like way less like Afro-Latin.
Yeah.
So how do you like, I guess like work around like,
Yeah. To be honest, I've never seen myself as a minority. Like, forget that. Like, no. Because I just, no. Like, well, no, I don't think so. Right? Like, but I also got more comfortable as I got older to sort of say that. In the past, I would be like, oh, I don't know what to do. Right? Like, I would be too cautious, and you just get, we're also actually in a particular moment, societally, that we can have this conversation. Like, I don't think this talk that I just shared with you all would have been even given 10, 15 years ago in the context of design. Like, it just wasn't. We weren't talking about this, right? And I'm super excited that this is what we're talking about, that we are interested in talking about it, and that the field of graphic design needs to realize, oh, by the way, like, there's a multitude of ideas and a multitude of perspectives that are not seen, yet we make work that goes out to communities, but those communities are never represented, which is why you will get in trouble sometimes, because you do like insane things that make no sense and are actually pretty offensive. And that is because there's no diversity, right? Like, so I think it's just important to see the value of your perspective and just sort of say, yeah, it's value. And no, I don't speak for everybody either, because it's not a monolith. And I'm just putting some work out there that has these things that I'm interested in talking about. And some of it is just doing internal digging or self-work. Some people with self-work. 23andMe was hilarious. When I got it, I was like, oh, I got it, and I'm like, oh my God. you know, like, and you get the updates, and I'm like, I'm 26% Portuguese. What? I'm 23% from Ghana. I'm like, what? And I'm 1% Mexican. And I was like, oh my God, that explains it all. And then you literally go down and you're like, everything. It's like anything between like Europe and this continent, I got a chunk of it in me. And I'm just like, that's incredible to think about all of that and start to really read about it, talk to friends about it. Somebody's podcast is talking about it. So I've been trying to catch up on the podcast thing because there's a lot of really amazing podcasts where people are digging through some of this stuff. And I'm like, wow, I do a lot of walking, so I listen to podcasts while walking. And I'm like, oh, that's amazing, right? And they're not designers, you know? So you're listening to people that are talking social sciences. You listen to some anthropologists. You listen to like people who are doing genetic work on like the genes and like trying to figure out where, it's pretty amazing. So it's a lot of like just boosting yourself up a little bit and saying, I need to take time to like investigate this side of me and I love it and I'm gonna love it. I hope that's helpful. Yes.
One of the quotes earlier really struck me, which was, so what, it doesn't work, keep going. So obviously that refers to a lot of the creator's block. What's like your biggest way to get over that creator's block?
I go to bed. Honestly, I go to bed. Like, I'm like, okay, you know what? This ain't working right now. I go to bed, I go do something else, and I try to like go look at it again, because maybe I'm thinking too hard. We all have the thing that we think too hard about it. Like we're obviously, sometimes it's so obvious, but we just don't realize, well, I'm thinking too hard. Why am I thinking so hard about this? Or you get obsessed with like, it's gotta be this way. And you're like, no, it can't. So to me, a lot of it is just like, you know, like one thing that computers are really good is just make a copy of that file. Duplicate that page and just move something across and be like, okay. Or call a friend. Hey, I'm working on this thing. Can you give me some parameters right now? Give me 3 things. Or you say, hey, I need a color. I'm just gonna say graphic design. I need a color, I need a typeface, and I need a size of a book. Can you give me that? What? What are you talking about? Just don't ask questions, just do it. And then whatever they give you, use that. It's like, oh my God, I cannot believe you asked me to design without typeface. Or that color, what? That color? Where's that coming from? But you start to get comfortable with like just shifting things. And because a lot of the work we make is digital, you can change it back. So, you know, losing the preciousness of the work too, I think it's important, right? It's just pieces of paper, sometimes digital paper, sometimes cheap paper. Sometimes you decide that you're gonna go buy some fancy paper to mask something. But it's just paper that you can take a pen, print it out and be like, I'm gonna doodle on it and see what happens and put it back in, scan it and write over it again and then scan it again and keep it going. And all of a sudden you go, wow, I love that. Does that help? Yeah. Don't think about making one thing. I know that like a lot of assignments you're given are probably like, here's the thing that you need to make. So there is in any way you're gonna make one, but you should give yourself time to actually make multiple things. And then you can decide which one is gonna end up being the thing. Or it might be a hybrid mix of all the things you made, and you figure out, how do I put this together into one thing? This is it. It can't be one of these. It has to be all of these things in it. So I use transparency a lot. So I will make things in different layers and then turn them all on and then start moving things. It's really looking at me, that sounds like a tactic that you've done, right? Like all cut and paste, right? Like, or you use transparency sheets and then you start putting, and you're like, okay, I need to start cutting away. I told the juniors today, start cutting away into the work. You pull out that X-Acto knife and you're like, you know what, this part doesn't work. I'm gonna cut it out and see what gets revealed. So losing preciousness of the work, I think it's really important. And sometimes a lot of the designers that you see whose work, you're like, wow, Guess what they're doing? They're like throwing things around. They're not on camera, they're not on stage, so they're like, cut this up, rip it up, let's put it back together, analog or digital. But I encourage you to work a lot with analog. Digital really fakes you out in thinking, oh, it's perfect, it's done. Work analog. And then bring it to the computer. So, yes. Similar to the Miro Board, I just keep hacking down through it. Like, you know what, I've been doing a lot of notes on the phone. I love notes. And I've realized that by the time I get to the bottom, it's like I've cut down to what I finally, and I've been processing through it. It's also giving yourself time to actually think through some of it, not just to write it all. Like, it's really important to get it all out. And then you take some time to just be like, okay, let me start to really pull things or make connections and say, oh, this is the thing that I'm interested in. This is the idea that's really going to be important. And I think something I learned in grad school and something that I think is incredibly important is like, you can make a project and that project can live with one idea, and one idea is good enough. You don't need to jam a project with 54 ideas, which is something that I used to do, and I think it's very easy to do. That you just keep jamming ideas into it, and then it's sort of like, ooh, it's like a souffle, it just goes, right? But all of a sudden you like go one idea and you hit it, and you like explore from every angle, and all of a sudden this thing like just glows. Because you're giving yourself the time to literally concentrate on that one singular idea that you're thinking through, right? And you're thinking, how do I like expand this idea and get multiple perspectives on it, rather than like, I have 54 ideas, of which all of them I have to try to show 700 different perspectives, and then you're like, okay, this thing just grew so large, I don't even know what I'm making. So, yeah, 1 or 2 ideas I think are really good to explore, right? Is that helpful? I hope so. How are we doing with time? Is everybody okay? Let me know when we... Other thoughts, other questions? Comments, jokes. Yes. If I heard you correctly, as a teacher, do I have certain things that I share? Nuggets of wisdom. Nuggets of wisdom. Okay. Be really nice to people. Number 1, remember you're dealing with human beings. You should be always super nice to people. That was probably one of the most amazing lessons from grad school. That was Callie, you heard me say her name earlier. Callie, that was a big thing that she told us. You have to be super nice to people. Always, always. And then I add like, kill them with kindness, because sometimes you have to deal with people that just, for some reason, for whatever reason, they're just going all over the place and they like explode at you. And then you just have to kill them with kindness. And they're human beings. I mean, I think just really thinking about like who do you, I said it in here, it's like, who do you want to work with? Who do you want to collaborate with? Who do you want to engage with in the work you're making? I think that's super important, right? Like, you may not necessarily need to finish the work. It may be finished when you get together with these people, or when they get it, because you may not be there at all. And then you just see a picture that somebody posted of the way this group of people are reacting to this thing that you made. And it speaks to them, or it touches them, or it makes them laugh, or makes them cry, or, you know, like there's emotion, because you're really thinking about human beings. And I think those are really important for us as designers to really think about. And that's not talking about human-centered, that's a whole other thing, because human-centered design, it was not human-centered at all, but I really think it's just being thoughtful about, like, I'm engaging with people and human beings, and I'm respectful, and I'm open and generous to engage with them in conversations, questions, different opinions, and just creating spaces and work that allows for that, so that people can just engage with each other. So, how was that a little nugget? Yeah. Any other thoughts? Should we wrap it then? All right. Thank you all.